DJ Rhett Podcast. That's your mom and them.
What's up, Ryan? We got Ryan Perque up on the podcast. Thanks, man, for joining me. How you doing?
Happy to be here, man. Appreciate the invite.
Let me take my damn my computer's going retarded right now. I don't know if you could hear it. This is the first time. Well, look, this is I want to thank you because you're allowing me to. You're going to be the guinea pig for me doing this.
Look, I'm used to that, man.
You used to that? You used to being the guinea pig? You used to getting poked around and shoved in places you don't belong?
That's what we're in the business of. We always try a new thing.
Well, I wanted to try the podcaster that I got kind of remotely just to see if it would work. And you were so gracious enough to let me do that. So tell me about yourself. Tell me about Friends of Bayou Lafourche. We've done work in the past together. We work on projects. We actually got some projects that we're working on currently. But tell me a little bit about yourself. Tell me how the Friends of Bayou Lafourche came about and what it's all about and events. Just kind of spew what the organization is all about.
Awesome. So yeah, my name is Ryan Perque. I'm executive director of Friends of Bayou Lafourche. I guess a little bit about me going back, born and raised in Thibodeau, spent a little time up on the Northeast right after college working up there. And, the old saying, there's no place like home. So moved back down to South Louisiana, moved back to Thibodeau. I worked for the city of Thibodeau for a little while, for about 5 years. Then went over to PCM, Pipeline Construction Maintenance, where you and I met. Mm-hmm. And then back in 2017, I accepted the position as director of Friends of Bayou Lafourche, and we've been at it ever since. So, I guess to give a little bit of description of what Friends of Bayou Lafourche is, I'd be remiss if I did not mention the Bayou Lafourche Freshwater District and kind of their role in our area and what those guys do. So, it's to even begin the conversation about the Bayou Lafourche Freshwater District, we've got to go back to the very early 1900s. Prior to 1900, the river flowed freely into Bayou Lafourche. Mm-hmm. It was open for water supply, open for commerce. It became a problem every spring when the river water levels would raise,
right? And
all the areas of our region would flood. The spring floods is what everybody talks about, and we still see that today when you hear of the spillways being opened or the river getting to dangerously high levels when they've got to open the different spillways and gates.
Right.
That happens today. We just have better control over it with the levee system and the spillways. So prior to that, when the river levels would rise, a lot of that water would come down Bayou Lafourche, overflow its banks, and flood our areas. Now, that kind of somewhat gave us the whole reason of why we settled along the banks of Bayou Lafourche, and I'm talking, up in West Ascension Parish or the western portion of Ascension Parish, and Donaldsonville, then you get in Napoleonville, Labadyville, Thibodeau, Raceland, Lockport. That's why we settled here many years ago, is because of the water.
The crabs, bro. It's the crabs, man.
The crabs.
And the redfish. And it's so plenty down by Lafourche, bro.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
And so, it became an issue in around 1902, 1903 is when the Army Corps of Engineers levied off the Mississippi River. And part of that levee closed off Bayou Lafourche to the river. And so it helped prevent these floods that were taking place every spring, and every few years you had big floods that took over homes and businesses and crops. So it was necessary to prevent the floods. However, the impacts of leveeing off the river, we see that day in and day out now, not just in our region, but across all of Southeast Louisiana. So by solving one problem, we created another.
So when you cut off that supply, it literally dries up the whole area.
Correct.
Even you got to
so
kind of take the good with the bad, when you're looking at it that way.
A lot of people say, well, hell, just open it back up to the Mississippi River. Then our homes would be underwater every spring.
Right.
And none of us want that.
Nope.
Right.
Nope.
So the river is levied off, or the Bayou Lafourche is levied off, and between 1900 and 1950, the bayou began getting a little stagnant.
Mm-hmm.
There was bridges built across the bayou that obstructed the flow. And this is not just a drainage ditch or a small waterway. This is where we get our drinking water.
Right.
So
a lot of commerce, a lot of wreck, a lot of stuff went into that. But if that doesn't flow, it becomes, like you said, stagnant. You got probably nasty stuff that it's like smells like a dump, that when you're passing by.
It does,
yeah.
And it was ignored for about 5 decades,
mm-hmm.
until the 1950s, when the state formed the Bayou Lafourche Freshwater District. And so what they did is they built a pump station in Donaldsonville that pumps water from the Mississippi River and puts it into Bayou Lafourche.
Mm-hmm.
So these guys not only manage the pump station, but also manage the flow. When there's trees that fall, they remove that. They take care of the dredging. And then, so 1950s or so, we've got an entity that's putting water into Bayou Lafourche.
Right.
And so it puts us at a little bit of a disadvantage. Is the river will always have water in it.
Mm-hmm.
It flows, and I say naturally, but there's always water being put into there.
Right.
For us, and when I say us, I mean Lafourche, Terrebonne, Assumption, and what the western portion of Ascension Parish, we get our water from Bayou Lafourche. Well, Assumption, Lafourche, and Terrebonne are not on the river.
Mm-hmm.
We get our water from the river, but we're not located on the river, so that water has to be put into Bayou Lafourche.
Right.
So essentially, we're using Bayou Lafourche as a pipeline to get our drinking water.
Fresh water, yeah.
Correct. So
not just fresh water for drinking, but also bathing, cooking, everything, right?
Right. You across the district, which is the western portion of Ascension, all of Assumption, all of Lafourche, and most of Terrebonne.
Right.
90+% of Terrebonne, sometimes 100% of Terrebonne, depending on the time of the year.
And what's interesting too is some projects that at the beginning we were talking about that we worked upon. I'm going to put some of the links in the description to some of the video work that we've done for you guys. I never realized that the bayou was, first it was man-made, it started off as probably a little drainage ditch, and then it grew into.
Believe it or not, there's some, I guess they would, I don't know what their title would be, scientist or
geologist
or whatever.
The guys that study dinosaurs.
Correct.
All right.
Correct.
Yeah, those guys.
Some of those guys actually believe that Bayou Lafourche was the main channel of the Mississippi River.
What?
At one time. Way back.
So the natural occurrence of where the Mississippi would have flowed.
Correct.
It kind of makes sense because I live in Berg. And it's very high. I mean, it's like as far as it's one of the highest places as far as like flood. I think we're like 13 feet above sea level, which is crazy to me when you consider something like New Orleans is 3 feet below.
Correct.
It's crazy.
And so earlier I was talking about how the river would overflow, and then all of its distributaries would then overflow. That's why the highest areas in our region are always next to the waterway.
Right.
Specifically Bayou Lafourche, and in Napoleonville, down Thibodaux, Raceland, Lockport, the highest areas are along the banks of these waterways because of the spring.
It's no different. It's no different when you go to and I'm being trying to be funny here, but that's no different than going to Destin when you're sitting in the sand and that water comes up, and when it comes back down, it kind of makes those ripples. like in the
Right.
sand. It's basically our area around here. It looks like a finger, kind of like, and the bayous are in between. So I know what you're
And
talking about.
so
It
no,
builds up
you bring up
naturally.
the beach and you kind of see where the sand comes up from the Gulf and then
Hmm.
it drops back down a little bit.
Hmm.
That's what we were looking at. Every spring, all this water and sediment would come, overflow the banks, and the highest areas are near the waterways,
Right.
these canals, these bayous. But I was given an analogy way back when of when the river was flowing freely for many centuries before we got here. When you turn a hose pipe on full blast, it wants to move and sway like a snake.
Right.
And before we got here, that's what the river was doing. So it
Hmm.
had many paths. Whether or not Bayou Lafourche was a main channel one day or many years ago, whether the Atchafalaya was the mainstream, but so the river moved, and you had all these distributaries that took on the water and sediment and built up our coast.
Right.
And it's the reason why Southeast Louisiana sticks out further into the Gulf than everybody else, is because we're sitting on sediment collected from the Mississippi River.
Right. From, I mean, I don't want to say millions of years, but I mean, it's hundreds of thousands of years. It just builds
Correct.
up,
Correct.
over
So
that.
the sediment that we're standing on today came from, in theory, could have come from Canada or all the way in the northern portion of the U.S. where the river starts.
Right.
So we're sitting on borrowed sediment here.
Right.
And so it's crazy to think a raindrop that falls theoretically in Canada ends up in you and I sink
Right. And
as a resident of Lafourche, Terrebonne, Assumption, and Ascension.
it's not far-fetched. I mean, it's
No.
completely not far-fetched. Science makes crazier things happen. But I wanted to go back to what you said earlier. When you said hose pipe, our northern people, that's a spigot, just to let them know, okay?
Yeah, I mean that.
When you turn the
I'm
hose
sure
pipe.
some listeners are saying hose pipe. It's the same. It's the
I
same
have to
thing.
say that it's a disclaimer because everybody's like, what the hell is he talking about, that dude? And I'm
Right.
like, a hose pipe, I
A
know what he
spigot,
talks about.
A hose, a pipe. I guess that's just kind of one of those things we
It's
say
a
down
hose
here.
pipe.
I have to be corrected on it.
I have to disclaim it for all our northern people north of I-10, so. but anyway.
So, but no, getting back to what I was saying, in 1900, we're cut off from the river. 1950s, the freshwater district is formed. They start putting water into the bayou. And then we fast forward to Hurricane Gustav,
Mm-hmm.
which wreaked havoc in our area. And essentially what that did is it somewhat turned Bayou Lafourche septic. It took all this vegetation and all the trees that were built up at the bottom of the bayou, flipped them over, churned up the bayou.
Right.
And so all the water users, these 300,000 people that were relying on Bayou Lafourche, now have this rotten egg smelling water going into their home.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was the light bulb moment for our area, both to somewhat reorganize the district and use that as the catalyst to revitalize Bayou Lafourche.
Right.
So about a year or so after Hurricane Gustav, the freshwater district hosts a series of summit meetings where they got input from political leaders, both locally, statewide, and federal, local key stakeholders, and all that stuff, and came up with a plan to introduce more water into Bayou Lafourche. And so I'm gonna get into that in a bit, but several of the things that came out of that was that we need more outreach and we need more recreation for Bayou Lafourche.
Right.
And so
I mean, you have this beautiful waterway here that nobody really knows about. And if you teach people, I always go back to, if you build it or if you teach it, they will come or they will listen, So you guys are doing great things with the organization in that regard. So.
Right. And I appreciate that, Rhett. And you guys have been very helpful in helping us put the media together to get that word out. But what we've been able to do now with both keeping people informed, letting them know what's taking place in the bayou, plus the recreation projects that we've got in place. And these are brick and mortar projects, parks, launches, docks, up and down 106-mile stretch of Bayou Lafourche is great to see. But one of the other big things that came out of those post Hurricane Gustav summits was our opportunity to revamp Bayou Lafourche to feed fresh water and sediment down to the lower parts of Lafourche and Terrebonne Parish.
Right.
We talked about when Bayou Lafourche was open to the river, we were sending all that water to South Lafourche and South Terrebonne, and we cut off a lot of that when we did that. You guys have spent some time down in Leeville with me, and,
right.
and it's nothing but marsh and salt water now. At one time, there was citrus farms.
Yeah,
and
I remember
oak
that.
trees in Leeville, where it was a hub for citrus to be grown.
Right.
Well, since we've cut off the fresh water and the sediment, all that salt is moving in.
Right.
So
it's killing it all. All I see is rozos down there.
Yeah. Rozos and dying marsh.
Right. And dying cypress trees and stuff,
Right. I mean, you can still kind of see the bases of them, but that's about it.
Right.
In its overly most simplified form, salt water is moving in, and we've got to do what we can to simply push the salt water out. Mm-hmm. And you do that with fresh water. And that's everything that CPRA, the state's coastal restoration group, and all these diversion projects, at the end of the day, that's what these guys are doing, is simply pushing more fresh water into our coast, our marsh, to keep that salt water out. If you can push more fresh to keep the salt out, you're making some headway.
Dude, I have an idea now, and I'm just going to throw it out there. I'm going to throw it out there, and I have to. Good. I can't. So, I'm the king of parodies in Cajun land now, right? So you just said push it, right? So we're going to have to do something, push it real good. We're going to have to do salt and pepper. Maybe salt and pepper on some chadrons, like the thistle. Let's push it real good. The salt, we don't want the salt in the water. We want the salt on the thistle,
Look, I think the state should hire you to do a push it video, and that'd be the main focus and their outreach for coastal restoration.
Dude, this is I'm telling you, just the craziest ideas just pop into my head, and I have to just go bleh, because if I don't put it out there, I'm gonna forget. So
right, just you got it right. Look, I can only imagine it's got to be hard in that brain sometimes when you got so much going on.
My wife, that's she's got to deal with this all the time. So I'm worse than a woman, just I'm mood swings, like I tell everybody, I got 38 people that live in this head, and I don't know which one's talking. So,
you just got to keep them in check.
I just keep them in check. They off to the corner every now and then. I got to slap them, but it's okay. It's all good.
But now speaking of the push it reference.
Right.
So what was?
I want to ask you too. You said that at some part they cut off the water. Is that why Cutoff is named Cutoff right there? I just
which one of those 38 people just put that into your head?
The old papa that sits in the back.
Look, that's a look. I'm gonna
when you said Cutoff, I was like, oh my God, wait, hang on a second. I was like, did they name that town Cutoff because they cut off the water right there?
I'm gonna find out.
Yeah.
I'm gonna find out.
Galliano, I don't know what happened right there. Golden Meadow. That maybe it was Golden Meadows down there. You talking about the citrus?
I'm sure that has something to do with.
I'm telling you, bro. Like it might be. It might be. Who knows,
bro?
Look,
that might be a video that we need to cover. Is how did all the cities along Bayou Lafourche get their name?
But I was going to write a song about all the names. I was chasing a woman from Galliano, and she cut me off when I gave her a La Rose from Golden Meadows. Whatever. I'm still working on it, but
it's work in progress.
So tell me about Gustav, because I remember Gustav. I think Gustav changed. So Gustav was right behind Katrina, I think it was.
Correct.
And then the 1-2 punch was Gustav it was Katrina. I'm sorry. It was Katrina and Rita. Then it was Gustav and Ike or something like
Correct.
that. Okay.
I think you're close on that.
Rita, I remember Rita, the water came up very high, but very slow. It was like because Rita moved across the Gulf and hit Texas, but it just pushed all that water into us. It was Gustav, though, that kind of opened everybody's eyes and said, holy crap, because the water came up so high so fast. Right. And after, I mean, there was some flooding, there was some devastation with Gustav, but it wasn't more of structural damage. It was more of like environmental damage that happened with Gustav. So I think that's mixed with the idea of we need to do something about pushing this water and creating awareness. Kind of came up with this idea.
And that was kind of the light bulb moment. That's what opened everybody's eyes. You know, unfortunately, you know, I've spent enough time in government to realize that it's hard to get the public's attention until something catastrophic happens.
Yeah.
And when something catastrophic happened, and our region used it as an opportunity to raise the awareness how important the bayou is, and to get those state and federal funds. And you know, so for your listeners, both local and northern listeners, you know, we have surface water, which is what you and I are used to. You know, we get our water from rivers, canals, and bayous. And then you have your groundwater, which is your wells, your springs, and stuff like that. Well, down here, we don't have those wells and springs.
Right.
So we've got to be able to get our water from surface water, which is the rivers, the canals, the bayous. Well, we're surrounded by salt water. Salt water can be treated to put in homes, and it's done in very remote places, but it's very, very expensive from a parish or municipal standpoint. So salt water can be treated. It's just very expensive to do. And you know, if we switched our whole region over to saltwater treatment, their bills would multiply over and over again, which is why we need that fresh water.
Right.
And then you get into fresh water and you start looking at, okay, we've got a decent amount of fresh water around. Why are we not pulling from some of these other areas, the swamps and stuff like that? Well, it narrows us down even more. We can't pull water from a treatment standpoint from the swamps and from the freshwater marshes, because there's so much organic matter, a lot of it decaying. You know, over decades, you have fish,
wildlife,
you have wildlife, you have leaves, you have grass.
Boudreaux killing Thibodeau, you know, burying him.
Correct.
Yep.
And yeah. and all their nutria, right?
Yeah.
All the nutria that they cut the tails off, they keep the tails and throw that back in.
Just throw that back in, yeah.
Right. So you have all this organic matter
that
makes the water, again, difficult to treat. So that leaves us with the Mississippi River. That leaves us with the Mississippi River of being fresh water that's moving. It doesn't have all that organic material in it. So, you know, here in Assumption, Lafourche, and Terrebonne, we're cut off from the river.
Right.
We can't just tap into it like many other river parishes can. So we use Bayou Lafourche as our pipeline to get our water.
Right.
So, you know, post Gustav, a plan is put together. It's called the Mississippi Reintroduction into Bayou Lafourche. And it's a series of projects to introduce more fresh water and sediment into the bayou, and that serves several purposes. One, more sustainable drinking water, a better source of recreation, but most importantly, it's to get more of that fresh water and sediment down to the lower parts of our parishes that are one of the fastest eroding areas in the world. And we're not directly tied to the river, so we can't just open some gates. We've got to channel that through Bayou Lafourche. So
they weren't channeling any water before Gustav, or
they were pumping water,
but not at the capacity.
Not at the capacity that we
have now
today, because of several. We had, for instance, there was a railroad bridge up in Donaldsonville,
right?
That at one time was cut off. You had an earthen dam and with some culverts passing through. So if they couldn't turn the pump station on full blast because it would flood everything above the railroad track. So back in, I'm gonna get my years mixed up, 2016 or so.
Mhm.
That bridge, I think in 48 hours, the earthen dam was completely removed and a fixed span bridge was placed in its place.
Damn.
So what you had before where water was just passing through culverts,
Mhm.
now you have a bridge where boats can physically pass
Go
underneath it. And
under.
I think you guys were with us a couple of years ago when we did those videos.
The
So that
videos,
was
yeah.
just, it was basically a dam with some culverts that restricted the flow. Then
Like
some
a little
dredging,
ditch, pretty much.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Several miles of dredging were completed. So with the railroad bridge being open now, some of the most needed dredging being done, they were able to turn the pumps on full blast.
Mhm.
So those pumps run 24/7, 365 at full blast, which is around 400 to 450 cubic feet per second.
Right.
It matters of filling a few Olympic-sized swimming pools in a matter of seconds.
There's a cool little I think it's on YouTube or it might be on y'all website. It's a cool little animation of how much water is pumped into
Right.
there. And
Right.
it's
A
just
lot of people
it
just
blows your mind. I'm like, God, dog. You know, like, yeah,
right.
you can fill up so many, like the Superdome in a half hour or
Right.
something. Like it's crazy
Right.
amount of
And
water.
so, I say it runs 365. Every now and then when we get these crazy rainfalls, we may pull the pumps back a
For
little bit,
flooding purposes, yeah,
but most of the year it runs full blast.
right.
And so now we're pumping as much water into the bayou as we can.
Hmm.
We've recently removed the weir in Thibodeau, which was obstructing boat traffic and the flow.
Right.
We have water control structures in place when, if we have a drought or a big flood, we can temporarily close these gates to control the water elevation.
I got you.
And so in a situation where we haven't had rain in a while, we have sustained north winds, the river is low, we're pumping the best we can, and the water gets low, we can close these gates and create reservoirs for the water treatment facilities to keep pulling water
I got you.
out of the bayou to serve their customers. So a lot of the projects to introduce more water have been completed. The last two big projects that we need to get done is a new pump station that's going to be built right next to the existing pump station. So
Which
right
is
now
in
we're
Lower Lafourche, right?
Donaldsonville.
Oh, Donaldsonville. The pump station is in Donaldsonville. The
To be able to
treatment,
pump more,
the
to be able
treatment
to pump
center's in Lower
Right.
Lafourche. Okay, I got you.
Right. So I mean, we have treatment facilities in Donaldsonville, servicing West Ascension Parish.
Uh-huh.
Assumption has a plant. The city of Thibodeau has a plant. Lafourche Parish has two of them, and Terrebonne Parish.
Mm-hmm.
So Terrebonne Parish, their water plant back of Water Plant Road.
Right.
Right. Who would have thunk it?
Yeah. Why would they have built on that road? Name
Right.
that already.
What's the chances of them building
It's
a water plant on Water
crazy,
Plant
man.
Road?
That's crazy.
So you got all these water treatment facilities. So in extreme cases, we do have measures to close these gates
Mm-hmm.
for the water level to create these reservoirs for the water treatment facilities. And so the new pump station will have the ability to do 1,000 cubic feet per second.
Wow.
We're doing 400 right now. The new pump station will have the ability to do 1,000 cubic feet per second.
Now that just increases the ability of the water to move down to that. The main reason why y'all want to pump more water in there is to get it more cleaner down the bayou, right?
To kind of revitalize Bayou Lafourche into the distributary that it was prior to the bayou being cut off from the river.
I know you're not one of these plant botanists or whatever, but I mean you might know a little bit more than I do. These lilies that like pile up in the bayou, is that because it's salty or is it more fresh? Because to me, I'm thinking fresh. Okay, so but they're a nuisance almost. You know what I'm saying?
No, they are, and that's one of the tasks that the freshwater district takes on every spring is eliminating these lilies and all these invasive species because that bottlenecks that bottlenecks the flow and restricts the bayou and stops everything we're trying to do to get that fresh water
Right.
down to the lower parts of Lafourche and Terrebonne.
It's good for frogging though. It's good for frogging and gatoring, but I mean
it's good for frogging. It gives the fishermen like it,
right,
from a sense of being able to go fish. But it's
traveling and that stuff. Oh man,
it's detrimental to everything we're trying to do in pushing that fresh water down by Lafourche. So
what do? Do they just pick it up out of the water, or they spray it with something?
Some of it they use sprays that are safe for a source of
environmental stuff. Yeah.
And some of it they've got a machine that'll scoop it up.
I got you.
So as long as they're able to get a jump on it in the spring, it's been a lot of help. So
right.
Not only does it stop or restrict the flow, all this vegetation grabs the sediment, all that sediment that we're trying to get down the bayou.